Joe Arridy was born on the 29th of April, 1915, in Pueblo, Colorado, USA, to his mother and father, Mary and Henry Arridy. Mary and Henry were first cousins. He was their firstborn child. For the first 5 years of Joe's life, he couldn't speak. Then when Joe did start speaking, he spoke very slowly and struggled to put sentences together, and also struggled to understand a lot of what people were saying to him. This carried on into his adult years also. When he was in the first grade, the principal told his parents to keep him at home, saying that he could not learn. When he was 10 years old, his father sent him away to a care home in Grand Junction, Colorado. It was a home for mental defectives. Whilst Joe was at the care home, he was given an IQ test where it was discovered he had an IQ of 46 and the mental age of a 6-year-old. Joe lived in this care home until he was 21. On the 9th of August 1936, when Joe was 21, he decided to run away from the home, and he started train hopping. On the 20th of August, Joe arrived in Cheyenne, Wyoming. There, he found a job washing dishes for several days in exchange for food on a kitchen car run by Mr. and Mrs. Glenn Gibson. There is no known information about Joe's whereabouts from the 9th to the 20th of August, so this is where this story can get a bit hard to follow. On the night of the 15th of August, 15-year-old Dorothy and 12-year-old Barbara Drain were assaulted while sleeping together in the same bed in their Pueblo home. Their parents, Riley and Peggy, had gone out for the evening, leaving the two girls home alone. Dorothy was raped, but Barbara was not. Both received blows to the head from what was later known to be a hatchet. Dorothy was killed, but Barbara survived. She was put into a coma for 2 weeks after being bludgeoned in the head. On the 26th of August, Joe was arrested for vagrancy in Cheyenne, Wyoming, after being caught wandering around the rail yards. When Joe revealed under questioning that he had travelled through Pueblo by way of train after leaving Grand Junction, Colorado, Laramie County Sheriff George Carroll began to question him about the Drain case. Carroll said that Joe confessed to him. Joe didn't have access to a lawyer and seems to have been pushed into a confession by Sheriff Carroll. When Carroll contacted the Pueblo police chief, Arthur Grady, about Joe, he learned that they had already arrested a man considered to be the prime suspect, Frank Aguilar. Aguilar had worked for the father of the Drain girls and had been fired shortly before the attack. Aguilar was drawn to Grady's attention and arrested because despite having been fired by Riley, he showed up at Dorothy Drain's funeral on the 20th of August and seemed to be acting suspiciously. An axe head was recovered from Aguilar's home. Aguilar maintained his innocence through 5 days of grilling, but finally, on the 2nd of September, 15 days after his arrest, he confessed. He says that on the night he had raped and killed Dorothy Drain and severely beaten Barbara, he overheard a couple of men mention that Riley Drain and his wife were going to a dance, so he went to their home, watched them leave, and went in and committed the crime. Sheriff Carroll claimed that Joe told him several times he had been with a man named Frank at the crime scene. Joe first claimed a club was used in the murder, but changed his story to an axe after the authorities found one in Frank Aguilar's home. When Carroll got Aguilar's name, Joe suddenly identified a co-conspirator named Frank. Aguilar later confessed to the crime and told police he had never met Joe. Barbara Drain had testified that Aguilar had been present at the attack, but not Joe. She could identify Aguilar because he had worked for her father. Whilst in court, District Attorney French L. Taylor asked Barbara if she saw the man in the courtroom who attacked her and her sister. She said yes. When asked to identify him, she walked across the room, stood in front of Aguilar, and pointed at him. When the case was taken to trial, Joe's lawyer, Fred Bernard, pleaded insanity to spare his client's life. Joe was ruled to be sane, while acknowledged by 3 state psychiatrists to be so mentally limited as to be classified as an imbecile, a medical term at the time. They noticed he was incapable of distinguishing between right and wrong, and therefore would be unable to perform any action with a criminal intent. On direct examination by Bernard asked Joe some 22 questions including, Do you know what an oath is? Joe answered, no. Who is President of the United States? Joe answered, Hoover. Who is Franklin Roosevelt? No answer. Have you ever heard of George Washington? Joe answered, no. Do you know what the hearing is about? Joe answered, no. Can you read? Joe answered, not so good. Can you write? Joe answered, sure. Can you write anything besides your name? Joe answered, no. Arridy was convicted, largely due to his false confession. He was sent to the old Colorado State Penitentiary in Cannon City. The only physical evidence to link Joe to the crime was hair. A toxicologist from Denver testified that the hair the police claimed to have found at the crime scene matched Joe's hair, against odds of 250 to 1. Not only was there no scientific basis for such a claim, but Bernard established that there was no record of hair having been recovered from the crime scene until after Joe's arrest. Thus, even if the hairs actually did match, Bernard pointed out the explanation might be that the toxicologist had compared Joe's hair not to hair recovered from the crime scene, but instead to hair taken from him at his arrest. The Pueblo cops conveniently found a witness to place Joe in Pueblo the day of the drain crime. The witness was Saul Kahn, a pawnbroker who claimed that a man who gave his name as Joseph Arridy, not Joe's name was not a nickname from Joseph, his name was simply Joe, bought a cheap pistol from him. How Joe, who never had any money and who didn't know how to count, paid for the gun would never be explained, nor would a gun ever be found. And the theory that Joe and Frank Aguilar acted together was strengthened, supposedly, when the two were brought face to face in Chief Grady's office and Joe blurted out, "That's Frank." The star witness for the prosecution was Sheriff George Carroll. Carroll was asked in court to start at the beginning of Joe's confession, detailing it as he can remember it. Exhibiting remarkable recall, Carroll recited verbatim stretches of dialogue such as this. "First off, I started by saying, 'Well, Joe, you like the girls pretty well, don't you?' And he said, 'Yes.' I said, 'You have had several girls during your lifetime.' And he said, 'Yes.' I said, 'If you like the girls so well, why did you hurt these two girls?' He said, 'I didn't mean to.' After testifying that Joe had said he watched the girls from bushes until a car left and the lights went out, Carroll assumed the roles of both himself and the defendant. 'How long did you stay there?' Joe answered, 'Until the lights went out.' 'Then, did you go into the house when the lights went out?' Joe said, 'No, we waited a little while.' 'What for?' Joe answered, 'To let the girls go to sleep.' 'How long did you wait?' Joe answered, 10 or 15 minutes. 'What did you do then?' Joe answered, 'We went into the house.' 'How did you get in?' Joe answered, 'We went to the back door, but the back door was locked. Then I went around to the front door.' Carroll recounted how Joe had described striking the girls with a hatchet, and continued with his testimony, which reflected Joe's limited vocabulary. 'Then what did you do?' Joe said, 'I got in bed with the girls.' 'Did you have sexual intercourse?' Joe answered, 'I don't know what you mean.' I says, 'What did you do to the girls?' He says, 'I screw 'em.' Attorney Gail L. Ireland became involved as defense counsel in Joe's case after his conviction and sentencing. While Ireland won several delays of Arridy's execution, he was unable to get his conviction overturned. He noted that Aguilar had said he had acted alone, and the medical experts had testified as to Joe's mental limitations. Ireland said that Joe could not even understand what execution meant. Joe received 9 stays of execution as appeals and petitions on his behalf were mounted. While held on death row during the appeals process, Arridy often played with a toy train given to him by prison warden Roy Best. The warden said that Joe was the happiest prisoner on death row. He was liked and treated well by both the prisoners and guards alike. Roy Best became one of Joe's supporters and joined the effort to save his life. He was said to have cared for Arridy like a son, regularly bringing him gifts. Before Joe's execution, he said he probably didn't even know he was about to die. All he did was happily sit and play with a toy train I had given him. For his last meal, Joe requested ice cream. When questioned about his impending execution, he showed blank bewilderment. He did not understand the meaning of the gas chamber, telling the warden, No, Joe won't die," Before being taken away to the chamber, Joe reportedly had not finished his ice cream and requested for the remaining ice cream to be refrigerated so he could eat it later, not understanding that he was to be executed soon and would not return. He was reported to have smiled while being taken to the gas chamber. Momentarily nervous, he calmed down when the warden grabbed his hand and reassured him. Best and a 50-person entourage escorted Joe to his death, and on the way he gave his train to a fellow inmate. Inside the execution chamber, Joe sat down in the chair in the center of the room. Prison guards strapped him down and blindfolded him. Roy Best was noted to have been crying during the execution, pleading with Teller Ammons, the governor of Colorado, to commute Joe's sentence before the execution. Ammons refused. In 2011, Governor Bill Ritter gave Arridy a full and unconditional pardon, saying, "Pardoning Joe Arridy cannot undo this tragic event in Colorado history. It is in the interests of justice and simple decency, however, to restore his good name."